Just because Leo season has ended and the sun has left Leo and entered Virgo does not mean that we are done with inner child season. Right now, Venus, the goddess, just entered the fiery sign of Leo and is also co-present with Mercury, which is just ending its shadow retrogradation period as of today, August 25th. Now, if you look at and have watched my other videos, you will know and be familiar that Leo is the area of our chart and the area of our lives where we are being called to really master and project our inner child, the existence and the persona of our inner child. Now, before we get into it, I'm Michael the Hierophant. I'm a mystic and magi, and I invite you to join me every single Wednesday at 6:30 for my astrological and divination-based spiritual workshop, Consciousness, Conjunctions, and Conversations. We get together on Zoom. It's completely free. We review the last week's transits. We go over the aspects and the movements of the celestial bodies, how they manifested in our lives energetically. We tell stories, both individually and as a community, to tie together the elements of these celestial transits and how they show up in mundane as well as collective astrology. And we also look at the following week's transits, and I help you delineate where these transits and aspects fall in your own spiritual journey to help make sense of the narrative that is your life, because that is what we are living in. We are all living in a cosmic narrative, and that's why we can use astrology like the weather. Whatever happens above us happens below us, and some energies don't affect others the same way that it affects others, just like some people love the humidity in Florida and other people you couldn't pay them to live there. The energy is the same way. We all have a different interaction with it, and it affects our lives differently. One of the biggest takeaways I think that I'm really proud of this class is that it allows you to place yourself in the cosmic narrative of your life, to make sense of the ups, the downs, the good and the bad, and to put them into a greater context of your life and what the creator and the universe is trying to teach you using the astrology that we are all experiencing and co-experiencing with each other. So please, I encourage you to join me at my class every Wednesday, 6:30. The link is in my bio. It's an evergreen link, so you're always signing up for the next Wednesday's class. I will see you there. Let's dive back into Venus and Leo and some of the astrology happening around this ingress into Leo. So let's start with the fundamentals, as I always do. Leo is the sign of the inner child. It is the prescription of our lives that we funnel and lens our inner child through the Leonic area of our chart. So if you're a first house Leo or a Leo rising, it's really important in this life that you learn to project and live as your inner child, because quite likely you lived in a stifled or suffocated home growing up, or had some sort of dynamic within the family that prevented you from shining as bright as you need to shine in this life in order to get where you need to go. And you can apply this anywhere in your chart. If you have Leo in the 4th house, for example, and you're a Taurus rising, this might look like you needed to have shown up as more of an inner child in the way that you parented, perhaps more as a child yourself, and then you didn't get to do that as an adult. You know, inversely, your 10th house, this is going to mean that you need to show up as an inner child in your place of work, in your career, in your legacy, how you put yourself into the public, because that is going to be where you are going to have the most success. Now, as the goddess Venus enters Leo, Venus is going to be much more on the receiving end of things. We are going to become much more magnetized in whatever Leonic area of our chart Venus transits, because we have to think of Venus as being representative of our desire body. Venus is everything: sensuality, sexuality, desire, pleasures, our relationships with women. Regardless if you're a woman or a man, it doesn't matter. This is our relationships with women. So if you're a man in relationships with other women, this could be your relationships with them. This could be your relationships with a sister, with a mom. And obviously, if you're a woman, sister, mom, other women, yourself, etc. It's also our relationships with self-care. So as Venus enters Leo, which is a fire signs tend to be much more about receiving energy. This is not a by and large type like application. However, I tend to find that when transits are moving through fire signs, we tend to experience externalized circumstances. So to contrast Venus in Leo versus Venus in Cancer would have very much been hitting our feelings body. That was our emotions. It would have been in benefit of the moon. However, with Venus moving through the sign of the sun and the home of the sun, this is now affecting our ego and our sense of personal self. So it's like when Venus moved through Cancer, she was teaching us where we need to nurture or be nurtured, where we need to provide or provide more, specifically in terms of the family, the home, our relationships with our mothers. And now that Venus has basically moved through Cancer and shown us all these areas we need to nurture and provide for more, now she's moved into the fiery sign of Leo, where it becomes a little bit more self-centered. It's a little bit more about us and the show. so to speak, because Leo is all about theatrics, and Leo in modern astrology is often associated qualitatively with the 5th house. So if you're having a hard time understanding what Leo in the inner child means for you in terms of symbolic verbiage, think of the 5th house. And so the 5th house is novelty, romance, creativity, your relationships with pets and children. It's also about self-expression and leadership. So Venus is asking us, and so basically Venus's needs are going to be funneled through the projection and the perspective of our inner child. Now, all of this is happening simultaneously while Mercury is cohabitating the same house as Venus, and Mercury has just left its shadow period, or is leaving its shadow period today. Essentially, we are getting the first increments of Mercury in this synodic cycle at the degree that it's at, which means that there's new information coming through. And what that suggests to me is that Venus and Mercury are directly connected in this way because we have spent the last couple weeks now since Mercury left retrograde reviewing all of that stuff that came up during retrograde. And now we have kind of packed our bags, symbolically speaking. We have packed our bags with what Mercury asked us to pack, you know, the list that he created for us, you know, during the retrogradation period. We've gone through, we've checked it all off, and we've now moved on to the next thing. And by moving on to the next thing, this has essentially allowed Venus to enter this throne room of the sun. And now our desires, our pleasures, our sensualities, our sexualities are going to be channeled through this very fiery, dramatic inner child demand. Now, immediately as Venus enters the sign of the sun, it's going to trine with Saturn in retrograde in Aries, and Saturn is just about to go into Pisces. Saturn's going to re-enter Pisces September 1st, but we get a little bit of time in Aries still first to, you know, create this harmonious trine. And trines are of the nature of Jupiter, which suggests to me that whatever's being shown in this relationship is still at the benefit of the healing, the spiritual obstacles and healing that Jupiter is putting forth in our house of Cancer. However, with Saturn being in the superior position here, just barely, literally by minutes, Saturn is still in the superior position here to Venus. So whatever Venus is doing, whatever that harmony and that pleasure, those desires that are coming up in the Leonic area of your chart that are coming up and showing their face today, they're all for benefit and the support of that physical reality check that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is giving us in Aries. And we'll dive into the Venus trine Neptune trine tomorrow because it's not perfecting until tomorrow, but I will kind of touch on it in this video a little bit more, a little later on. So essentially, Venus is trining this Saturn retrograde in Aries, and Saturn retrograde in Aries is asking us, where have we not shown up as leaders? Where are we not showing up as the leaders, the pioneers, the innovators in the Aryan section of our chart before he moves back into Pisces and basically says, hold on, pump the brakes, you need to get your bearings and figure out who you are in the collective. But again, we're getting this right before that ingress back into Pisces. So Venus is kind of saying, hey, there's this allure, there's this thing that you want, and you're getting a little bit closer, but you still kind of got to keep grinding the milestone, so to speak. Now, at the same time, the moon is actually in Venus's masculine sign of Libra, co-present with Mars. And while Mars isn't going to play a huge factor in this until tomorrow, and again, I'll mention that a little later, the moon in Libra is suggesting to me that wherever our emotional body is at, whatever we're feeling inclined to do based off of the desires and the pleasures, the sensualities that Venus is bringing into our awareness, that is directly responsible, or at least tied to where we are trying to bring a sense of balance and harmony in our lives in the Libran section of our chart, which is where we've actually been putting a lot of action and maybe fighting against the current a little bit as Mars is in its fall in the sign of Libra. So our drive and motivation in that area of our life might be a little stifled right now, but we're going to really feel that today. Now, the sun is also in Virgo, and Virgo's ruler is Mercury. So this essentially, to me, with Venus having just entered Leo, suggests that the sun, which is the great illuminator, it's like the flashlight, is pointing a light on maybe the things that aren't working so well. And this is allowing us to juxtapose, okay, this is what I want, this is the reality of things. And that space in between, that difference in between, that is Saturn. That's the Saturn measurement right there. That's Saturn saying you still have work to do. Now, tomorrow, Venus is going to trine Neptune retrograde. the moon will go conjunct with Mars in Libra, and Venus will also sextile Uranus, which is in a throne room of Mercury. So again, we're getting some information that Mercury is still bringing us, and this is relatively new information, but we wouldn't be able to be where we were had we not integrated and experienced what we did during the retrograde period. So think back to the retrograde period. And essentially what's going to happen is we're basically getting these downloads, these perceptive updates, these communications that come through, whether they're internal or external, but again, quite likely these are externalized situations. Even if you're reflecting on them, they're probably being triggered by things that are happening in your exterior environment, and it's causing you to feel a certain way, think a certain way. And so essentially, with the Sun in Virgo and Uranus in Gemini, both ruled by Mercury, there is still a lot of mercurial influence on these Venetian desires, because it's a good chance that our Venetian desires in the house of Leo are being altered and changed based off of this new information that Mercury has brought to our attention. Now, we're gonna, like I said, gonna get way more into Venus trining Neptune tomorrow, as well as the Moon-Mars conjunction and how that's kind of playing out into the story, what it means, as well as Venus sextiling Gemini. However, everything that's coming up today, we're still being shown the deficits of our desire and where we're not showing up in the Aryan section of our lives enough, because there is still work to be done. And we're going to continue to see these themes as the weeks go on, as Venus moves through Leo, as the Sun moves through Virgo, especially once the Sun moves over the South Node in Virgo, where we're going to get another straight shot to a karmic pattern, you know, a realization of a karmic pattern that needs to be broken. However, we're being led down a path which is going to ultimately lead us to the desires of our Venetian body. If you enjoy these astrological narratives, I encourage you to check out my class, which is every Wednesday at 6:30 Pacific time. You can sign up at the link in my bio. The RSVPify link is an evergreen link. It's where you'll get the link to the Zoom class, and it'll cue you right in on any of the details you may need. I hope to see you in class, and if I don't see you in class, I'll see you in the next video.